So I just finished. Sorry, immediate stumble over my words. I just finished my Sunday One Piece stream, and during it, someone in chat, Mari, said, postulated the idea of going through every single Final Fantasy game, because we were talking about video games and Final Fantasy, and what I feel about each one, and giving quick thoughts on each one. And I immediately thought, yeah, why not? I think that could be cool. My voice might be a little shot because I just finished streaming, so apologies if so. But yeah, I thought it would be fun to just immediately do that. A few years ago, I put a video ranking all the Final Fantasies I played on my main channel. But it's been a year since then. I played more Final Fantasy games, and my thoughts have evolved, and this is less of a ranking as much as like, if you guys wanted non-spoilery, in a non-spoilery way, not going to get into super specifics, details about my thoughts, very quick, a minute or two for each game, on each Final Fantasy. I've had a lot of people with the FF announcements in the news lately, asking me best entry points, thoughts on each game in the series, and all that sort of thing. So, and my thoughts on each one, aside from my rating, I guess, on Backlog. So I decided this would be a good video to put together, so thank you for Mari for suggesting it, and let's get into it. Like I said, this is just going to be very short, quick thoughts, not a full analysis or anything on each one. That's at least the idea. Let's see how it pans out. We start at the bottom with Dirge of Cerberus as the worst Final Fantasy game I played. Now, even the games that I think are the worst are not necessarily horrific. Most games in this, I think, are at least a net positive. The vast majority, I think, are a net positive. Most are good, at least. Dirge of Cerberus, I actually remember the least out of probably any Final Fantasy I played, because I played it, didn't enjoy it, and kind of just only latched onto specific lore details that I think of for my FF Re-Trilogy videos and or to apply to FF7 Re-Trilogy, FF7 lore. And that's about all I've retained. The plot details, the backstory, but the bits I do remember, the gameplay was not very fun. I think it goes about a very interesting premise and goes about discussing the story in a very sort of diluted, simplified, not very interesting way that feels like there's a discrepancy between the writing for most of FF7 and Dirge of Cerberus. It's just a really cool premise that's not executed in a way that is brimming with any sort of the type of quality that it deserves. So, for that reason, really not enjoyable, not a positive, and just overall a lot of missed potential. It's bottom of my list. Similarly, with missed potential, would be the Dawn Trail expansion for Final Fantasy XIV. I would say that there's missed priorities all over the place. I think there's immense peaks of this. I think there are characters that could be among my favorite in the whole series in this game, and that's favorites for all of Final Fantasy XIV, which is my favorite cast in video games, in this game. But they just aren't dwelt upon. The interesting concepts that are introduced are not really dwelt upon in any specific, in any real way. Zeralja, I believe, oh god, sorry, I meant to do that in another tab. Zeralja, to me, is a character that really could have been an incredible character, a really, really interesting character, and as it stands, he's my favorite in FF14 Dawn Trail, but he's not nearly as good as he could be, and he could have been like top 10, top 15 in the whole story. That's just how I feel about a lot of it. I think a lot of the bulk of the story is spent on doing things that really could have been done in the patches prior, whereas most of the story could have been focused on what ends up being the last quarter to third of the story, which deserved to be more fleshed out, which is full of interesting concepts that really should have hit more with Sphene and all that sort of thing. The living memory and everything. That stuff's really interesting conceptually. It didn't hit because it has very poor build-up, I think. It's just a mishmash of confusing prioritizations, misprioritizations, good ideas that are executed badly, and overall, it was a reboot, and there you can see them shaking off some rust for this new saga, but I am optimistic about the future. I think Evercold looks really cool. I put out a video about Evercold. Yeah. Strangers of Paradise. This is a game that may not have the highs of Dawntrail, but is it knows what it is, it knows its identity, it's very simple, and it all comes together in a really interesting origin story that connects certain things with FF1 in a really, really interesting way. It's fun, it's really cheesy, it's rompy, it's campy and over the top. It knows what it is, and it doesn't have a very high ceiling, but I really appreciate what it is. And yeah, like I said, there's some really clever stuff there. So, as you can see, we're now getting into net positives already. Next we have Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, the first story of Final Fantasy XIV. Again, not a very high ceiling, but it introduces the worlds well. It introduces the cast in an okay way. It's not a very good character piece. There are only 2 or 3 characters, Robon, Alphino, maybe 1 or 2 more, that are actually good. I think the character work really starts coming into its own from Heavensward onwards. And there isn't much incredible character work in A Realm Reborn, but despite that, there's some bits of good stuff. What I think really sells this is the setting. The way it presents the premise, it presents Hydaelyn, it presents the idea of primals, it presents Eorzea. The setting is really the star here, and I think it's interesting enough to really kind of hook you and make you want to know more about it. And the towns, like Ul'dah and Gridania, are so cozy, and it's such a cozy experience to just go around A Realm Reborn and do these things that may not be fun, may not be super fun, but there's a weird sort of relaxed coziness to it that I really appreciate. And it ends with a hook into the rest of the story that is quite good. It really introduces some plot points that are really interesting, that leads you into Heavensward, which takes a big step up, and we go from there. It's a net positive. It's not going to have you super emotional. It's not really peak yet, but it lays really important foundations in a way that's digestible, and I had a cozy time with it. Next will be Final Fantasy XVI. It is on the lower end of my Final Fantasies, and it's probably one of my biggest disappointments, because I think the potential it has is higher end Final Fantasy, but ultimately I find that it has some very confusing messaging. I think a lot of what it does is, what it wants to do is undercut by how it does it. I think some of the ways it gets across the messages of what it's trying to do with the slavery, the societal hierarchies, the societal and economic divides, segregation, and all of that is really undercut by the way in which it's presented. I think Clive's perspective is a bit muddied. I think the way they approach characters like Clive's dad just leaves you a bit wanting with regards to perspective. And I think it's ultimately not done effectively at all. I think it needed a more multifaceted perspective to really nail those messages home. And I also was left disappointed with what it does with its women cast. I think it introduces a lot of females and women that are really interesting. Clive's mother in particular, Benedicta, one or two others, Jill, and ultimately I found that it really didn't do much of interest with them. It either dropped them out of the story in one way or another in a way that didn't really allow them to blossom like they should have, or it kind of tailed off and didn't explore them in ways, and ultimately gave other characters that I think were less interesting the spotlight. So there's a lot of problems with this. I also find the battle system is fun, but gets old pretty quick. Maybe that's because I didn't experiment enough. That could be on me. The music is, I think, Soken's weakest. It's still pretty good. There's still some bangers in there, but it's still Soken's weakest. Having said that, I think Clive's a good main character. I think there are side characters that I find really interesting, like... hold on one sec. Let me get his name right. Sid, I think it has the first or second best Sid in the entire series. That may change to second or third once Re-Trilogy Revelations comes out, but yeah. Joshua was a bit of a miss for me. Like I said, Jill was a bit of a miss for me. Clive was decent. Sid was really good. I think Dion was really interesting. Barnabas was good. So there are some hits for sure. I think it did some cool things with Ultima. So yeah, there's some hits. But ultimately, I found myself enjoying exploring the setting, but it didn't feel as fleshed out as it should have been. I don't think the setting really had the spice that would have made me really want to really explore it as much as I think the game wanted me to. So yeah, I think it just doesn't really execute its premise to the fullest potential and misses on a few things. It's interesting because next up is Crisis Core, which I would say actually doesn't do as much good or doesn't have as much potential as Final Fantasy XVI, but I put it above Final Fantasy XVI because while I think a lot of the story is a bit flimsy, I think what it really gets across, well is the dynamic with Zack and Aerith, which I think is fantastic and is one of my favorite video game relationships. The dynamic between Zack and Angeal, how Sephiroth plays into that, and Cloud plays into that, and the ending. That ending never fails to make me tear up. I think it's incredibly emotional. There is just this raw emotion associated with Crisis Core that I never felt with 16. Even if it does other elements that I think it does other elements better than Crisis Core, for me personally, Crisis Core hits that emotional point a lot harder for me, and so I put it ahead of it. Next would be Final Fantasy V, and now we're getting into games that I think are genuinely very, very solid top to bottom. Final Fantasy V is very well put together in terms of the gameplay. I think it's tons of fun. It does a lot with a job system that was way ahead of its time, and the story is simple, but it's got some interesting subtext to it. I don't actually have a lot to say about Final Fantasy V, as much as it's just an all-around really solid package. Good main protagonist, interesting plot that isn't dwelt upon a ton, but it's got a good party. It's got a good antagonist. It's got some great set pieces and battles, and music is great. I guess why it's a bit lower in this list is just because it doesn't have as much of a story focus as maybe I would have liked. The story isn't a huge draw to it, and I love my story. Next, we'll go with one of the first I ever played, and the game I actually talk about as the best entry point into the series, Final Fantasy IV. I think Final Fantasy IV is great because it's got a lot of the Final Fantasy... It's a revolutionary game. It introduced a lot of the Final Fantasy staples, the crystals, the party, the world-spanning journey, that was replicated in future entries, but it does it in a way that's kind of simpler. But at the same time, it's very good. It's the first Final Fantasy to really have that much of a story focus. Again, I cannot vouch for this personally because I haven't played 1 to 3, but by all accounts, there is not as much of a story focus in 1 to 3. 4 was the first one to really make it a huge focus, although I heard that 2 kind of does that as well, just not to this extent. I digress. Cecil is a great primary protagonist. I think Kain is a great character as well. Their dynamic's awesome. Golbez is very good. The music's really good. I like Rydia. I overall really like the party and the adventure. The gameplay is tons of fun and addicting, specifically in the DS remakes. The 3D remakes. So yeah, the voice acting's good. It's an all-around really solid Final Fantasy entry that was revolutionary for not just Final Fantasy, but video games in general, and I think that it is the best entry point, because it really adheres you to a lot of the Final Fantasy staples, while being simple enough to acclimatize yourself to that before it gets more complex in later entries like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But it's still good at what it does. It's still really good at what it does, and it's a good adventure. I think it's a good game. The story's quite solid. And yeah, I think it was very formative for me. It was one of my first Final Fantasies, my second Final Fantasy. So, very good entry. Very solid entry, I guess. I'd give it more or less a strong 7 out of 10 or so. Next up is the Final Fantasy XIV entry expansion, Stormblood. This one is really interesting because I think it introduces a lot of things with the setting, with Doma, and so God, what I'm immediately forgetting the name. Sorry, I'm clowning on myself. Alamigo. Alamigo and Doma, and I think it fleshes them out really well. It's a very setting-focused story, while not sort of leaving you bereft of character work, because I really like Hien. I think it's got some good stuff for Lise, and I think it offers a really interesting premise, but I think it tries to stuff a bit too much in there. For it to feel really cohesive, it can at times feel turbulent. There are some writing decisions that I find a bit misled, a bit of misprioritization. It could have hit better if there was a bit more focus and streamlining maybe of exactly what they wanted to do thematically with this. And then some of the symbolism and imagery towards the end with regards to the final point it's trying to make, and the liberation and what it means to be liberated in these oppressed kingdoms. The messaging on that is a little bit confused, and Lisa's role in it and Reborn's role respectively in it, and I just think there's a little bit of I think there are ways in which it could have been easily polished up, the story. However, having said that, I think it's very good. Xenos is introduced here, and he's one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters ever. One of my favorite antagonists ever. He's phenomenal. Phenomenal character, great foundations laid here, great final battle, and some of the mistakes it makes, I think it really corrects them later. Stuff to do with certain characters, I won't say too much, but there are certain characters, stuff with certain characters that are, I think, expanded upon and sort of recontextualized later that does a really good job with them. And overall, it's a very solid entry, very solid Final Fantasy story. I enjoy it quite a bit, despite it having some clear flaws for me. Good characters, good setting, and honestly, some of the best Final Fantasy music. It's one of my favorite OSTs in a Final Fantasy story. It's a phenomenal OST. And the gameplay kind of stepped up a bit as well. Next is Final Fantasy 15. I consider this the anti-Final Fantasy 16, in that I think a lot of its strengths are Final Fantasy 16's weaknesses, and vice versa. I think Final Fantasy 16 has a really keen eye on bringing forth a really interestingly established setting, but doesn't actually do a lot with the premise for me. There are some thematics that are tied to it, but it isn't portrayed in a really emotional or compelling way. Whereas Final Fantasy 15, I think that there's a lot about the setting that is left up to the imagination and isn't fleshed out, but the way it manifests in the story is kind of brilliant and really emotional. I think there are lots of limitations. I don't think Luna Freya's a character at all. I think there are elements of the relationship there between her and Noctis that are really lost to me. I think the story kind of depends on you checking out the anime and ancillary works in the movie to really apply context, and I think there are characters that are kind of just there and really don't do much. There's a lot of missed potential here, and it feels, even in spite of the additions afterwards, it feels like a game that is unfinished to an extent. However, what it captures, its main strength, is the relationship between the four main protagonists, and the beauty there, the ugliness, how they fight against each other, and how they contradict each other and have issues with one another, the very human fights there, and mostly how much they mean to each other and their unbelievable bond and brotherhood. And that is done so unbelievably well. It's one of the best parties in a Final Fantasy. It made me cry multiple times, and that strength alone makes Final Fantasy 15 one of the most emotional Final Fantasies to me, and it gives it a 4 out of 5, an 8 out of 10 for me. In spite of the clear amount of weaknesses, characters not being fleshed out, it leaning on ancillary works that a game shouldn't lean on for you to feel elements of the story or understand elements. A setting that's lacking in proper exploration, I think. what it does well, my god, does it do it well. That final scene, the relationship between them throughout, top to bottom, start to finish, it's unbelievable. And so for that reason, I really, really like it a lot. And it's always going to have a special place in my heart. Voice acting's great, music's great too. Next up is kind of an anti-Final Fantasy 15 as well. There are elements to this game, Final Fantasy 12, the Zodiac Age, that do feel a little bit unfinished, specifically the finale and the dungeon, and elements of the conclusion. But overall, it's a very extensively rich, well-fleshed-out setting. A setting-based story. It's very Star Wars in a lot of the ways it gets across the politics, the nuances of the setting, and it's very anti-Final Fantasy 15 in that it is such a well-fleshed-out setting. But it doesn't really hit me emotionally. It doesn't make me feel the emotions of usually what a Final Fantasy game will do for me. But the cast is really good. I think Ash is an incredible Final Fantasy protagonist. She is amazing and a great foil with the end antagonist, with really cool human nuances that make you think of maybe what could have been if she went down a different path. Just a really layered, awesome protagonist. Balthier is great, incredible charisma, just a really great all-around cast. I like Vaughn, I like Penella. There is Vosh. Just the cast all around is really good. The music isn't really indicative of the melodies that are characteristic of Final Fantasy, but it accentuates the story really well. The setting, like I said, it's one of the best settings in Final Fantasy. The localization is very artful. The gameplay's an interesting departure that I enjoyed. All around, it's a very good game, very good story, and a middle-of-the-line Final Fantasy, which makes it a very good game. And it's a borderline favorite. I have a almost favorites list, which it's a part of. So, I really like it. Then we get into some favorites. Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles has some of my favorite writing and prose in anything. This game is just a delight. Specifically, the new version with the new voice acting and such, the compendium, which helps you keep up to date with the plot really well, polished gameplay. It's a really good sort of remaster and revamping that I think was needed for a lot of reasons. And it's an amazing Shakespearean plot with really good characters, a good exploration of the world, themes and societal structures and such that are very relevant today, and just ultimately a very evocative, moving story, I think, with great presentation all around, very theater-like, that I have very few complaints about, that I think is really, really good. This is a favorite of mine. I'd give it a 9 out of 10 or so. It's not for everyone, but it is definitely for me. It's very efficient. It does so much with so little. Sometimes there are chapters that are just gameplay, or sequences that are just gameplay, but when it tackles the story, it does so much richness with so little. And yeah, I think it's really good. I think it's incredible. Then we get into the top 10. Final Fantasy 14, Heavensward, to me, the first big step up in the story. I think what it does with the character work is a huge step up. It properly got me emotionally hooked with the setting. What it does with Ishgard is unbelievable. It expands upon the setting-based storytelling from A Realm Reborn and made me really lose myself in Ishgard as a setting, and its political strife, and its aesthetics and everything. But it also gives you the character work that you were lacking in A Realm Reborn with Alphino and Tataru. Tataru has some really cool supportive character stuff. God, I'm so embarrassing. My favorite game story of all time, and I'm forgetting the name of a really important character. What's her name? Well, there's Estinian, of course, but who am I thinking of? Emmerich. There's Estinian, there's Emmerich, he's incredible. Isel, who I was thinking of. Edmond de Fortin is incredible. Like, there is such a step up in character writing and emotional weight to the story as they streamlined things and really focused on certain things. And then the story was able to go to the incredibly masterful lengths that it went from there. But Heavensward to me is the most important expansion because it was the first step to that, the first step to greatness. It has a couple of maybe pacing issues. It isn't amazing the entire way through, but my god, it ends with incredible emotions. The character writing's great. Some of my favorite sequences in Final Fantasy. The setting's fantastic. The music's great. What more can you ask for? I love Heavensward. Just ahead of it, I'd put Final Fantasy VIII. This is a bit of a black sheep, specifically in the PS1 trilogy, where people talk about it as 7 and 9 as the classics, but 8 is kind of a bit of a black sheep because people don't like the gameplay, the junction system, the draw. It's not my favorite, but in spite of that, I love this game. I think it's got one of the best Final Fantasy plots. It is quite an interestingly complex plot that comes together in a really clean way. It won't spoil, but it's a great plot. It's one of the best Final Fantasy plots. The main character, Squall, is one of my favorites in the whole series, but the cast overall is really lovable and endearing, and they have a sort of found family element to them that is really fantastic. And their interactions are so raw and real. They're so rich. They're so imperfect. They're just a bunch of child soldiers and kids that you wish the best for, who are put into such an unfortunate situation that deserve more. The world building is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite Final Fantasy settings for how it establishes what the world is and how it came to be this way, how that ties in with the characters and the plot, and it's got one of the best, in conversation for my favorite Final Fantasy soundtrack. It's an incredible soundtrack. Cypher is an amazing character. Rinoa and Squall and their relationship, Selphie, Zell, Laguna, it is such a great cast. And I think it's really slept on to this day. Incredible background art, presentation all around. I have a couple of problems with some of the pacing and a bit of a gauntlet in terms of gameplay that they put you through. It's got some blemishes, but the positives far outweigh the negatives, and I love Final Fantasy VIII. I love it. I'll always go to bat for it. And honestly, I actually think the character writing is consistently, pound for pound, overall, actually better than Final Fantasy VII's, which is next. But Final Fantasy VII is the better game. It's iconic, it's legendary for a reason. Now, I have more problems with this game than people tend to, and a lot of it has to do with the localization. I think the localization and the dialogue really dilutes the impact of the story. So much of the presentation of a story and how it comes across is dependent on the localization and dialogue, and so much of it in 7 is a big mess. I talk about it. If you want more of an expansion on my problems with 7 and what I love about 7, check out my Final Fantasy 7 Remake and 7 comparison on my main channel, and the Rebirth one as well. I compare and contrast the remakes with 7 with excruciating detail. I won't be talking about that here, but to me, because of that sort of botched localization, which is done for reasons that don't have to do with the competency of the localizer and translator, it's just unfortunate stuff to do with crunch. Nonetheless, the final product that it comes out with is an unfortunately diluted script that makes the characters not as good as they can be, the story not as effective and emotional as it can be, and just it's sometimes incomprehensible, which is a shame. But in spite of that, the beauty of the story shines through. The cast is still really good. It's got one of the best plots in video games and one of the best plot twists, multiple plot twists, one of the most iconic moments in video game history. An incredible cast. Tifa is maybe my favorite character in the game. Cloud is unbelievable. Sephiroth is a great monster movie villain with awesome subtext. The setting's very well realized. It's very well paced. Midgar is an incredible introduction. It's got one of the best first hour or two of a game that I've experienced. The soundtrack is one of Uematsu's best. It's all around very deserving of its reputation. For me, I've just got a couple of problems that hold it back from, I guess, being a bit higher up on the list. And actually, let me just double check something. Because, yeah, okay. 6 and 7, don't do it, please. Don't do it, please, guys. 6 and 7 on this list are very neck and neck. It could go either way. I'll go with 6. 6 is one of the most important works of fiction I've ever experienced because it was my first Final Fantasy. I wouldn't say it's the perfect entry point, but it is a good one. It is a good one. And 6 is the ultimate ensemble cast. I think the character work in 6 is some of the best in the series, and it is uneven. There are characters in the incredibly large protagonist cast that just don't get as much, but I don't see that as a negative as much as an absence of a positive, and the characters that do get a lot are so richly expanded upon, have such great arcs. Edgar and Sabine, Terra, Celeste, Locke, just these incredible characters, some of the best Final Fantasy characters. And then, it's one of the best, I think the exploration of setting is kind of slept on. It's a pretty rich setting, but not as rich as maybe 8 or 10 or 9 or 14 or 7 or Ivalice, but it's a good exploration of the setting. And, I think the magic in this is in the character work, the dynamics, and specifically its main villain, which is one of the greats of video games. My God. I've done, one of my first videos I've ever done is about its, I'm going to say the name of him. Most of you should know this. Mute in the next 5 seconds if you don't want to know. Kefka. He's one of my favorite villains in anything, and the final battle is such a beautiful dissection of who he is, and the paradox of who he is and the complexities. It's unbelievable. Final Fantasy VI is there are some problems in the gameplay department. There are some problems with, I think, some things could be expanded upon. There are some bits of archaic game design. It shows its age in some ways, but it also is way ahead of its time in others. I think this is a beautiful, beautiful game. Next would be Final Fantasy VII Remake. Again, I made a video, a 3-hour-plus video on this. Go check that out if you want my full thoughts on it. But I'll just say this. It's one of the most important games I played because it properly fleshed out Final Fantasy VII and expanded upon it in a way that I was always wishing I could feel. I wanted to gaze upon Final Fantasy VII and love it in the way that Remake made me love it, and made me retroactively love 7 more than I did. The localization's great. It does such magic with the character work for the cast. It expands upon certain things in a way that is unbelievable. It has one of my favorite endings to a game. Even though it's very risky, even though it's not for everyone, it is such a creative masterwork with what it does, what it set the stage for, and what it's doing for the rest of the trilogy going forward. The choices it makes, man, they're not all perfect. There are some ways in which I think there are some chapters that are very thin, that Rebirth fixed and fleshed out. There are some chapters that are just a lot of nothing, a lot of padding to pad out the playtime. The pacing is not the greatest in this. There are some scenes that I think it doesn't capture the spirit of as well as it should, that the original just is better at. The original has better tight pacing. It has a better sense of occasion and tone in moments. But the things this does right, my God, it captures the magic of the characters and the universe, and the coalescing of the themes and all this in a way that captured my imagination so beautifully. And I'll always be so grateful for this in spite of the flaws. And I just see the last sequence of this, the last half hour of this game, is one of the best endings to a video game you could hope for. My God, there is a magic there. In hearing Hollow, the visuals are really good, the directing is great. It's one of the best soundtracks for Final Fantasy. It is magic to me, despite its flaws. But now we are into my top 5, and this is genuine masterpiece territory. This is 10 out of 10 territory. And Final Fantasy X, I don't doubt, I don't push back on the idea. I don't think it's unlikely that it could even rise from here, because literally, Final Fantasy X, I don't think I've ever experienced this with a game, at least not for this many years. But Final Fantasy X is a game that I played it 11, 12 years ago. And every year since I finished it, it has gotten better for me. It has gotten better and better and better. If you look at the flow of my top 100 streams, it has gone up in its placing every single year. Every single year. It's and there's nothing for 11 or 12 years. I thought it's better every single year. And there's nothing quite like that I think I've ever experienced. It is in the conversation for the best Final Fantasy setting. It captures a tragedy and a beauty and a potential integration between characters and themes and setting that is unparalleled in storytelling to me. And unlike maybe other Final Fantasy stories or other video games or stories even that do not flesh out the potential of the setting as much as they could, my God, does Final Fantasy X do it. Oh, it is brilliant in how it does it. It does everything it can with the setting in such an emotional way, in such a compelling way. It makes you think, it makes you feel. The cast is unbelievable. Maybe in the cast, there isn't any character that is a peak fiction type character. There are lots of characters that are close to being masterful, that are great, that are awesome, amazing characters. Tidus, Auron, Jecht, Yuna, Riku, I love. Waka, I love. It's a really good cast. And maybe there's no one that I love that's like top 20 protagonist in fiction level, like Zidane or Cloud or Vivi, or Aerith or Emmett Selk or whatever. But it is such a well-rounded, fleshed-out cast. Every character contributes. Every character is very good. There are no weaknesses. There are no blemishes. I don't think there are really any flaws with this story. The music is exceptional. The visuals, the vibes, the atmosphere is there. It's very hard for me to find games that capture this vibe and atmosphere as much as 10 does. And it gets better every year. And it has one of the best endings to a video game you're ever going to see. It makes me cry every time. And yeah, who's to say it couldn't go higher in this list? As it stands, is 10 out of 10. It's in my top 5. It's a masterpiece. But it could go higher. It really could. But then we go to Final Fantasy IX, which for a time was my favorite. It really was my favorite. And it's still in the conversation for being my favorite. It's in and around my top 15 fiction of all time, which means it's at the absolute precipice. Final Fantasy IX... maybe there are elements of the gameplay. It's a bit slow. The trance system is quite flawed for sure. But Final Fantasy IX, in spite of the flaw, it has a couple of flaws, maybe a bit of missed potential in elements of story sequences, whereas I don't think 10 really has those. But Final Fantasy IX is one of the best video game casts you're ever going to see. It has the collection of dynamics between characters. Zidane and Vivi, Vivi and Garnet, Steiner and Zidane, Steiner and Beatrice, Kuja and Zidane. And the way this plot is such a thrill ride that expands upon itself and recontextualizes certain things, it makes you think about things in a totally different way. The way it muses on purpose in life and identity and mortality and the sheer tragedy of the inevitability of mortality. And how these characters muse on that, it is so unbelievably exceptional. It is so beautiful. And it is very close to being number 3, or even 2, to be honest. This top 5 is very close. The margins are so close. But this is about how it shakes up right now in mid-2026. It's an exceptional game with maybe my favorite soundtrack in the series. It's just exquisite. It's an exquisite game, and it has the best background art. Maybe it, along with Resident Evil Remake, is the best background art in the game. It is presented so incredibly beautifully. The localization is very good. Just top to bottom, it's such a beautiful, compelling, thought-provoking, emotional game and story with one of the best casts ever, with some of the best music ever, the best presentation, some of the best towns ever, one of the best settings ever. The way it expands upon and explores the setting is incredible. And the thematics and how they are connected with the setting. It's just 10 out of 10 in every regard, maybe except gameplay. Oh, it's captured my imagination for years and years and will continue to. It is exceptional, and I really can't wait for being able to replay it. I'd love to replay it sometime. Number 3, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I have a 9-hour video on this. That should tell you all you need to know about my thoughts on this. It is one of the best games I've ever played. I think Revelation has a lot to live up to live up to Rebirth. It is just exceptional. And actually, people talk about, yeah, it's not perfect. It has a lot of flaws. I don't actually think it has that many flaws. I think it has some flaws for sure. Some limitations. It misses in a couple of places. But by and large, I think it is very lacking in flaws. And I think the things it does, the strengths it has, some of the best towns in video games, the presentation of the setting is out of this world. The music, one of the best soundtracks ever, one of the best casts ever, the dynamics, the way it expands upon the premise of the original to maintain the spirit of the original while also being totally loyal to the soul of it while expanding upon it. It's incredible, man. It's unbelievable. And one of my favorite tragic, gutting endings. Some of my favorite side content. Everything about this game is unbelievable. It's a dream game. Check out my video if you want an expansion on that. But my top two is a bit of a tandem. Shadowbringers and Endwalker, to me, is one story across two expansions. And Shadowbringers is the tighter, more perfect, less blemished version, because Endwalker has a couple of problems, but the highs of Endwalker are difficult to put into words. These two together is my favorite video game story. Some come close, like Re-Trilogy, like Yakuza Infinite Wealth, and Yakuza 0, and Twilight Princess. Some come close. But this is the best video game story I've ever experienced. Deltarune could rival it in the future. Witcher 4, Cyberpunk Orion, who knows? But this is the peak of video game storytelling. It quite simply is. Shadowbringers is the perfectly idealized... It is classic Final Fantasy in structure in a way that looks back on the past and dwells on it and pays tribute to it and the legacy and beauty of stories and heroes of Eld in this unbelievable way. It is theater. It is theater, and it wrings everything it can out of the classic Final Fantasy structure. You can't get a better classic Final Fantasy story like this. You cannot get better than this. And it ends with solidifying and crystallizing Emmett Selk as one of the greatest characters in all of fiction. The music is exceptional. The setting is unbelievable. It hits incredibly hard emotionally. It is tragic. It is uplifting. It has some of the best characters in the medium. And the only reason it isn't number one is because Endwalker does all of that and more. I didn't think you could get better than Shadowbringers, and somehow you can. The highs of Endwalker. My streams of this story was me crying for 5-6 hours. The emotions of this are unparalleled. The cast is the best I've seen in video games. Does it have a couple pacing problems? Maybe. I don't give a shit. This is pure peak fiction, and this crystallized Final Fantasy XIV as my favorite game ever. My favorite game story. Now, and this is the reason why I look at games and I'm excited about games to come out. I look at Stranger Than Heaven in the future, or more Deltarune chapters, Deltarune as a whole, Re-Trilogy as a whole, Witcher 4, Cyberpunk, Xenoblade Genesis, who's to say? And I say, are they the Endwalker killer? Because that is the standard. Endwalker has set itself up as one of the best stories I've ever experienced, the best game I've ever experienced, and the standard. It is the standard that I don't think many will live up to, but for me, it's what I aspire stories to live up to. It makes me feel like life is worth living. It's one of those games. A lot of these games make me feel that way, but none more than Endwalker and Shadowbringers together as a tandem. Anyways, 44 minutes. There are 22 entries on this. 2 minutes per entry on average. Not bad. I hope you guys enjoyed this journey through Final Fantasy. This is ranked from my least favorite to my favorites, but I hope you've enjoyed my blurbs on all of these. Feel free to share your thoughts on them. I had a lot of fun with this. Thank you again, Mari, for suggesting this. This is a great idea for a video. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.